I have a confession. I'm one of those people. The kind of girls who go to Starbucks and perch themselves at a table in the corner and spend the day there working. Now, in my defense, I don't sit there with a MacBook Air. I'm not a total cliche. I'm an artist and I do life drawings of things I see around the city. Never other people unless they ask or give consent, and sitting by a Starbucks window actually has a purpose. At least that's what I tell myself anyway, instead of just accepting that I'm on the cusp between millennial and Gen Z and a bit of a cliche of both. And during my almost daily visits to local Starbucks, I did notice a guy who kinda fit the cliche I'm insulting. He had an expensive, new-looking MacBook Pro, and he'd sit there throughout the day. Now, occasionally he'd type a sentence or two, often deleting and rewriting them, and then deleting them again, and then going to the barista to order another coffee. Sometimes he'd read these tattered old paperbacks, and I was thrilled to see that there wasn't a Jonathan Franzen, James Joyce, or Thomas Pynchon among them, although I would have given a Pynchon a maybe. Either way, it was clear that he was as much of a literary nerd as me, but like me, and unlike much of our generation, he wasn't pretending to read Ulysses or Gravity's Rainbow. And did you know, and I found this out from a Tinder date who was funny and honest, that some men crack the spines of their intellectual books to make it look like they've read them just to impress chicks. Now, I will admit, honestly, that did earn him a few more dates until we had to move out of state to look after a sick mom, and that kind of sucked. So back to Starbucks writer man, he was cute in a bookish, tousled blonde hair, slightly dad bod way, i.e. exactly my type. Now, I'm not exactly shy, and if I'm attracted to a guy, then I won't make a secret of checking him out, but I also won't make the first move. I can't completely kill the age of chivalry for eighth wave feminism or whatever wave we're on now. Now anyway, I was pretty psyched and a little thrilled when I caught writer guy checking me out. I'd worn the most manic pixie dream girl outfit I could think of. A plaid skirt, a beret, and some blouse or other I forget. Yes, I know I'm a cliche. Now wait until you find out that I'm an artist, but I'm a cool artist. I draw comics, nothing for the big two yet, but I have worked on a couple of titles from comic publishers you definitely have heard of. And at the time, though, I was still building up my portfolio, so I was mostly doing sketches and perspective practices and poses and things, rather than Spider-Man punching the crap out of the Shocker. Dream panel to draw, though. Anyways, writer guy first approached me by casually passing by my table after buying his third latte of the day. He pretended to tie his shoe and asked if I minded him placing the latte on the table. I said go ahead. It was no problem. And he said something about how he wouldn't want to spill his latte on my sketchbook. And then to his credit, he said something like, "I see you're an artist," instead of asking if I was, when he could see full well that I was an artist. And I told him that yeah, I was, and we ended up having an hour-long conversation about comics, still life, perspective, all sorts of things. And it was clear that he didn't know a ton about composition and the various nerdy details I was bringing up. But again, to his credit, he listened and seemed to pay attention without interrupting. When I was done talking, I asked him what kind of writer he was. Now here was where things got a little odd, because he was extremely cagey about it. I tried to flirtily coax the details from him, but all I could discover was that he wrote a combination of fact and fiction, meddled with metafiction, and was settling on a style. Now over the next few weeks, we hung out every now and then at the coffee shop. Not for long, we both had work to do, but if we saw each other there, then we'd have a little chat. I appreciated that he wasn't the type of guy who'd make a note of my schedule and turn up exactly whenever I did. I don't know, I guess being terminally online left me on high alert for red flags. And yes, the Starbucks had free Wi-Fi, so I really was terminally online, and I just wasn't seeing any red flags at all. And it turns out that the reason that I wasn't seeing any small red flags was because the guy was just one giant walking, talking red flag, and I guess I was colorblind. Now, the more we talked, the more we learned about each other, which, thinking about it, isn't true at all. We learned about each other's artistic ambitions, writing and drawing, and I asked him some things about his life. He was currently between salary jobs, living in his buddy's spare room trying to build a Twitch career in the evenings for if this writing thing didn't work out. And I remember him saying that he was a big fan of Moist Critical, and me telling him the word moist grossed me out, a word which he then used to tease me a lot. And I laughed throughout it, but in retrospect it was kinda weird. Like, yeah bro, my coffee is moist. The towelette is moist. I get it, you're trying to be flirty. And still a cave woman trying to headbutt the cave wall to create a shelf, I was too stupid to see any of the signs. I should add here, for anyone confused about the timelines, this went down in the summer of 2022. Starbucks had long since dropped their mandatory masking policy in most locations, and ours was one of them, thank God. I don't think I could have spent an entire day every day wearing those stupid things. Now, I didn't notice at the time, and looking back, I don't think Writer Guy really asked anything meaningful about me. I mean, there wasn't much to tell, but it would have been nice for him to show some interest in the degree that I'd studied. Surprisingly, nothing to do with art, an interesting story in and of itself, I think. Or what my family situation was, if I had siblings, one much older stepbrother and 3 sisters, one of whom at the time was basically an 18-year-old Karen. And he just showed no interest in my life outside of Starbucks other than my plans as an artist and career aspirations. Mostly he talked about how he wanted to get an agent, wanted to get a publishing deal, wanted to be the next big name in the literary world, etc., etc. Like, a lot, and repetitively. And you know what I decided at the time? I convinced myself that his shallow conversation was because he was building up to ask me out, and he was super awkward and shy about it. Yeah, the dude had no game, and that was pretty obvious, so latching onto the few things that we had in common, then repeating them, it made some sense to me. The dumbest part, at this stage I would have said yes if he just asked me out, and then I would have made sure that he found out more about me and vice versa. It had been a while since I dated, and thanks to the last couple of years, so I blame that for my bad judgment. Eventually I decided that if I was going to get some, I had to act. Even a movie date would do, and second base would be great. Third base would be more than enough, just literally anything. A date, a kiss, a modicum of interest from a guy who very clearly did find me attractive, considering how often I caught him checking me out. And I decided that the best way forward was to start being as flirty as I could with him without looking like a desperate, well, you know. And so one day, I had this great plan. Instead of buying our usual coffees from the counter so he'd see me come in, I drove through the drive-thru and bought our drinks that way. So when I entered the cafe, which thankfully didn't have a bell over the door, he wouldn't notice me as he sat writing facing my usual table, which was near the side window that looked out onto one particular street that I was fond of. I handled the door like a pro despite holding 2 coffees and crept up on Writer Guy. And the first thing I noticed was that there was actually text on the page. Now, maybe I'm the a-hole here because he always refused to tell me what he wrote because it wasn't ready, quote-unquote. But I couldn't help taking a peek before surprising him with the drinks. And what I saw made my jaw drop. And hey, I'm not a writer, so I'm not allowed to use dumb cliches like that, but I can't remember it word for word, obviously, but I do remember that he was writing in size 16 font or something ridiculous, which was extremely helpful. He was on chapter 5, and it began talking about how we'd established over the last chapters that by default, women are, well, words I can't really ask you to say on YouTube, and they're typically reserved for women of the night. And below that, he had written that he met a new girlfriend, and while she clearly was as loose as the others, she seemed to like him compared to other women. He had then written a screed about how, because he had me around his little finger, he could use my artistic talents to draw a comic he'd written, which would involve a character based on me who he could persuade to draw naked. Bonus points if I'd allow him to take reference photos. It was some kind of dramatically misguided pickup artist book coupled with an autobiography of how a loser like him had duped a hot chick like me. And I just stood there and read it all 3 times and then walked to the side of the table, placed his coffee down and told him that I bought this for him as a surprise. But that it turned out he was the one to surprise me. And at first he didn't understand what I meant until he saw me looking at the laptop screen. He slammed it closed and then started screaming that he hadn't given me permission to read his writing and that I was lacking the nuance and understanding to appreciate what he meant and various other things. He basically dug himself a 6-foot hole. The barista, who I also knew through his boyfriend, was a physio trainer and came over and asked if everything was okay. And this writer guy screamed that everything was not okay. I had read his erotic fiction about me without his permission. Again, it was like he wanted to bury himself. And the barista told him that perhaps he'd better leave, while flexing his bicep in very much a type of I could throw you out if I wanted to, buddy type way. Now, writer guy snarked at him and then looked around frantically for something to do. He didn't want to just lose by leaving, and so he grabbed the coffee that I brought him and flung it against the Starbucks logo on the wall. And then, even more fired up, he screamed that I'd ruined everything. Shocking me and the barista, he grabbed up his expensive, new-looking MacBook Pro, I'm pretty sure it was a 16-inch too, and then flung it in anger against the tiled floor of that Starbucks. Now, this laptop exploded into these weird pieces of glass and plastic and keyboard keys and circuitry, you name it. And then the writer's guy's eyes widened as if realizing what he'd done, and then he charged out the door, actively beginning to sob. The barista asked me if I wanted to call the cops or anything, but I didn't think it was really worth it. I told him I didn't know the guy's actual name even, but the barista replied that he did, from credit card receipts. And that was a relief, at least, in case things did escalate, but I was pretty sure they wouldn't. Well, I was wrong. I took a couple of weeks' break from visiting that Starbucks just because I didn't like the idea of him spying on me from another store or anything like that, but eventually I was like, screw it. I'm not having my favorite place ruined by that thing. And when I entered, imagine my utter surprise when I saw who was sitting at the table facing my usual seat. Writer guy. And I looked over to the barista, and it was a young girl, maybe just out of high school, and I guess maybe there was no way to warn the other baristas who'd been banned. No security footage or visual footage or anything. And I decided that screw it. I wasn't leaving. I walked up to the counter, ordered my usual, and then told the barista that she might want to watch out for the guy by the door. I said that I had a bad experience with him and he'd been aggressive. She told me the manager didn't actually allow permabans of customers unless the cops had been involved, which explained that. And she also told me, though, that she'd gotten serious creeper vibes from him and how he'd openly stare at her breasts when he talked to her and how he reached out to touch her name badge before she pulled away. And I felt so stupid. How had I ignored all these strange things just because I found him cute? How had I even found him cute in the first place? Not accounting for taste, I suppose, and I guess mine at the time was wannabe PUA who pretends to be a sensitive nice guy. Sadly, a common trope in later years. And as I was heading to my table, writer guy called me over. I contemplated ignoring him, and I knew he was only going to come over to my table if I did, so I walked over there and he immediately started apologizing, groveling and begging, tears in his eyes, all sorts of stuff, and then he started begging me if we could pick up where we left off, because he was certain that an erotic graphic novel featuring the both of us would be a huge seller. Well, that had escalated, and now apparently he evolved into the eroticism as well. I told him that in no uncertain terms was I his girlfriend, and I'd never been his girlfriend. I'd never be writing a graphic novel with him, and I never wanted to see him again. And he just sat there in silence for a moment, and a tiny, tiny part of me hoped that he was genuinely thinking about his actions. Instead, he reached out for the brand new looking MacBook Pro that he'd been writing on. And please just take it and leave it, I thought. And I swear down that he had bought a replacement MacBook Pro, although at least it looked like a 14-incher this time, and now he was snatching that up. Now surely he wasn't going to. And with some shriek of anger, basically a howl, he slammed this new MacBook Pro down onto the floor of that Starbucks. And once again, the ridiculously expensive laptop exploded in a shower of debris and electronic crap. And the guy just stood there, breathing heavily and furiously for a second, and I thought maybe he was going to attack me. And instead, suddenly, it was like all the rage dissipated from his body as he looked down at the second shattered MacBook Pro on the floor. And then he let out a scream and ran out the door. I can't be sure, and maybe this is just cruel, wishful thinking, but I'm sure I heard him yell, "Not again, Mom's gonna kill me," or something before the door swung shut. I wouldn't be surprised. Now this time I did get the cops involved, just so that they were able to get him permanently banned from that Starbucks. And it was easy enough for the cops to consider his actions for the destruction of property, even though it was his own property, since the laptops also damaged some of the tiles, so he got banned, and I avoided a living red flag, and I still get to visit my favorite coffee place. Only now, I'm drawing comics for writers whose names you probably haven't heard of, and most definitely wouldn't treat me this way. And that's pretty sweet, all told, but the insanity that I experienced with that writer guy, holy crap. Maybe one day that could make for a comic book of its own. Maybe he was just on drugs. It was the summer of 1996. The world was in turmoil, probably, I can't quite remember. It's always in turmoil. And in truth, I can't remember much about 1996 except that I was 22 in my senior year of college, and I was dating someone named Rhea, the absolute hottest chick I have ever been with before or since, apart from my lovely wife, who, of course, makes my ex in question look like some swamp donkey. But honestly, and my wife has given me permission to say this because she knew Rhea too back in those days, this girl was ethereally beautiful, delicate, elven features, strawberry blonde hair that caught the red in the afternoons and the blonde in the morning. She was stunning when I woke up next to her, even if after our first few nights together she'd jokingly freak out that I saw her without makeup. And she was the kind of girl who applied it in a way that the average dude would say that she didn't wear makeup at all. If I hadn't seen her spend an hour at the mirror painstakingly contouring her face in the most subtle manner, I would have thought that her beauty was entirely natural, and of course it was. She just amplified it in these gentle ways. And to call her a goddess feels wrong because she wasn't some kind of all-powerful being who commanded men and dominated a room. She was more like the most beautiful specter you've ever seen, or a fairy made human. At least, all of this was how she looked. As a person, she was kind of, let's just say, neurotic. She had specific things that she'd focus on. She wasn't autistic or anything like that, she just had weird things that she'd focus on. For example, if she wore a short skirt when we went out, she'd regularly ask me if she was accidentally flashing people. If I said no, it was just hanging just fine, then she'd just shrug and drop it. If I said that it was a bit windy so people might have seen a brief glimpse of the side of her underwear, she'd just shrug and drop it. She'd regularly ask me how many beers we had in the fridge, and if we had less than 4, she'd make me go on a grocery run to top it off to at least 6. And she didn't even drink beer. She collected CDs, but I don't think that I'd ever heard her listen to anything but the radio. Just these weird little quirks that for various reasons I'm pretty sure that she did deliberately because she was trying to be cute. It was the era of the quirky girl, and she'd often say things like, "I was born in the wrong era." But when I asked her what era she should have been born in, she'd think about it and then say, "This one, I guess." Now, I'm making her sound nuts, but this really was about 2% of her behavior. For the most part, we had a normal, healthy relationship. She liked going out for drinks and hanging with my friends, and she had one best friend who was also kinda hot, and while she was very friendly towards me, at the time I was convinced that she had a thing for Rhea. And my friends, who were all just regular guys around our age, were naturally kinda jealous that I'd hooked up with this elven princess. I was kind of the leader of that gang though, and I worked out a lot, and I think they all knew that I probably would have knocked them the F out if I'd caught them hitting on Rhea. And of course, her hot friend Cedar, yeah, apparently that's her real name, claimed to be married to a Russian in prison for murder. and she seemed to take great delight in shutting my friends down if they so much as put their arm around her. And plot twist, because it's not a very interesting way to end the story, Cedar was not in fact married to a Russian murderer, and that was just some crap Rhea made up, and Cedar is now my beautiful wife with whom I have 2 beautiful children. Now anyway, with all that out of the way, back to Rhea's other main obsession, and this one did impact our relationship a decent amount. Rhea was absolutely obsessed with the idea of making money in the most unusual ways. She didn't want to get rich. She didn't care how much money she had. She just wanted to find money-making schemes that would get people talking. We were both fairly well off, thanks to some inheritance and kind parents respectively, so it's not like she needed to focus on anything but grad school. And we were both studying various STEM subjects, and realistically it was a complete waste of time for either of us to go looking for work. But that wasn't what it was about for Rhea. She wanted to get paid, any kind of amount, for something unusual, and it was the strangest quirk I've maybe ever seen in a person. Now, for examples, she charged a local grocery store owner $10 to paint a huge, beautiful mural on the side of her store that pointed into the yard. And the creation of the mural and hiring a few people to help meant that she ended up at a loss of $190. She didn't care. She'd been paid $10 to paint a mural in the city, which is something very few people could claim. Another example, and okay, this one was kind of cool and I was a little jealous that she landed that job and I didn't. She spent one Halloween working as a murderous clown schoolgirl in a haunted house, where her sole job was to jump out, yell boo, giggle, and then run away. She took the job for $3 an hour and worked 10 hours a day for a week, and to her, that was a win. Finally, she hit me with the craziest idea yet. So, a week prior, we'd watched the movie Forrest Gump. She began the conversation by sort of coyly asking if I remembered the movie well, which obviously I did. It was the previous week. And I told her yes, and she replied saying the movie had given her an ideal money-making idea. I was expecting her to suggest some kind of walking initiative where people donated to her, or probably me, trailing behind, holding the donation bucket until she got bored. No, I couldn't have been more wrong. She asked me if I remembered the scene where Jenny, Forrest's one true love, plays guitar in the club. Now, I did remember it because it was kind of notable, obviously, and if you haven't seen the movie, she performs naked, and her nudity is covered up by the guitar. And so this was Rhea's plan. She was going to pitch the idea to small, artsy bars and clubs that she played raw acoustic songs, well, raw and naked. And this is someone who wouldn't wear a bikini to the beach and was only really comfortable showing off her legs, and certainly nothing above the waist or definitely between it. And even with me, she wasn't exactly the type to just stroll around the apartment nude, and after bedroom activities, she almost scrambled to pull a robe on or something. And here she was, wanting to basically perform guitar pieces naked in front of a bunch of artsy strangers. And I tried to explain to her that it wasn't like the movie. They used clever cuts and camera angles to avoid the fact that Jenny could have almost certainly been seen totally naked by a number of patrons, not to mention the backstage people, etc. And Rhea told me that no, she was confident she could manage to pull it off without actually revealing her body to anyone. And I decided to just leave that and move on to asking her about the performance itself. And it turns out that she'd never tried to attempt to learn the guitar. I could play the guitar pretty well, actually, to the point that I was in a pretty amateurish, unsigned band. And so, of course, I was roped into teaching her guitar. But she was hopeless. We practiced and practiced and practiced, and even though I kept advising her that she was over-practicing and making things harder, she was having none of it. And eventually she could successfully strum a G chord and occasionally switch from a G to a shaky C and then back again. And Rhea decided that this was enough for now, and she was on track to become a guitarist. And besides, acoustic performances were meant to be raw and simplistic. I wasn't prepared to argue this, so I just asked her to let me hear her sing. And I imagined that at least she was one of those girls who sang in her hairbrush in the mirror, and given how beautiful her speaking voice was, I was at least expecting something. Imagine a cat being strangled. Now imagine a cat being strangled while having a cactus shoved where no cactus should go. The sound that cat made would be melodic compared to Ria's singing. I genuinely couldn't even work out what song she was attempting, and when she told me it was Patti Smith's song with a title I most certainly can't say on YouTube, you could have knocked me down with a butterfly. She asked me if she was as good as she'd been told and if she was ready to sing in bars. And I had two choices here. I could let my girlfriend have the most embarrassing night of her life, or I could tell her the truth and take the heat for a day or so. And I opted for the latter. And Ria absolutely lost it. I'd never seen her behave like this before, not even close. And she began shrieking, just these noises aimed at nobody in particular, running her hands through her hair like she was shampooing it. And that's when she told me that she'd booked her first gig for 2 weeks from then. And it was at the local open mic basement bar run by one of our friends that we knew. We knew everyone there. Our friends hung out there. My ex, who was on great terms with, was the bartender, and this basically meant that not only would our entire friendship group see my girlfriend nude, no matter how convinced she was that she could keep herself covered, it also meant that they'd hear her acting like an absolute mental patient while taking herself completely seriously. I considered the idea of trying to persuade her to present it as comedy, or maybe even anti-comedy, or freaking something that wouldn't end in an unmitigated disaster. And I begged her to cancel it, and before I could even react, she grabbed up my old acoustic guitar that we'd been using to learn and smashed it over my head. Now, it knocked me unconscious probably for like 10 seconds, I think, and I'm lucky as hell that my head is apparently very hard because it caused the strings to snap instead of cutting too deep into my scalp. There was blood though, and splinters that were dangerously close to my eyes and lips. I carefully stood up, holding my head downwards to make sure that I didn't get wood in my eyes, and this means that I missed Ria's grand exit. And all I could hear was, "I'm leaving forever," and the door slamming behind her. Now, of course, she didn't leave forever. She had to awkwardly return a few days later to get some things, which took up about half the apartment. She tried apologizing to me, but it was the kind of apology where she clearly just wanted me to see her side. And along with that, she'd smashed my old acoustic guitar over my freaking head. That instrument had been inherited from my grandfather and had survived a number of middle school, high school, and college parties and bonfires. Don't worry though, I never played Wonderwall or Stairway. Now anyways, I essentially threw Ria out and then time passed on. I had to visit the bar on the night of her supposed first performance just so I could try and stop it, but thankfully she wasn't there. Her friend, as you know, my now wife, Cedar, was there though, and it turns out we were both there to prevent Ria from making a complete nude ass of herself, pun intended. Cedar and I drew closer over time, and I soon discovered that there was a side to Ria that I'd never seen. Apparently, she'd been known as a queen bee mean girl in high school and had only befriended Cedar in college after Cedar had lost a bunch of weight and gotten hot. And some of the old stories that she told me about Ria from high school were just downright deranged. For example, she performed a solo dance routine at the school talent show, changing her song and choreography at the last minute and then screaming at the audience when they didn't give her a standing ovation. She'd decided that certain girls, and even a few of the more docile boys, had slighted her in some way, so she'd go out of her way to sabotage them and get them into trouble while remaining sneaky clean. And when I asked Cedar why she'd become friends with Ria and why she'd never warned any of us, she became quiet and introspective. Eventually, she admitted to me that she was a pretty devout Christian, and she believed in forgiveness and allowing people to change, and that Ria had completely managed to convince her during college that she was a much better person. I couldn't blame her. I haven't even suspected this side of her. And shortly after, Cedar and I began dating, and as usual, we hung out with our friend group at that bar. It was open mic night, and who should take the stage but Ria, clutching a tiny pink ukulele. Now, I was deeply relieved to find that she was fully clothed instead of trying to cover all of her most intimate bits with a tiny uke. And what followed was somehow even worse than the guitar performances. And by the end, even some of our friends were screaming to get off the stage and never come back. Cedar and I decided to sneak out the back door. Unfortunately, I froze when I heard Rhea scream my name, and she began screaming that I was the guy who sabotaged her music career. She claimed that I'd somehow made her bad at playing guitar, and she insisted that I tried to persuade her to perform nude, and what a creep this made me. And of course, most of my friends knew at least part of the story and knew it was all nonsense. And I just turned to leave, but Cedar shouted out for me to watch out. Rhea had hurled her little pink ukulele neck over head straight towards me, almost like a throwing axe. Now, thankfully, I was able to dodge the uke, which shattered into some pieces in one of the concrete pillars that held up the bar. I could see the fury in her eyes, though, and I knew it wasn't over. This time she grabbed a beer glass that was almost full, much to the anger of the guy who'd been about to take a sip from it, and she flung it, but of course she had no hope of hitting me from that distance. Now that didn't stop our little military buddy Sid from stepping in the way of that glass anyways, though, and unfortunately it did hit him and shattered right into his face. I'd never seen anything like it. There were shards of glass everywhere, and some of them were even sticking out of Sid's cheek. One thin shard was pierced almost through his nose, and a sliver had gone right through his lip. Now, worse was the long, bloody piece that was a fraction of an inch below his eye socket. And you know what the goddamn legend did? He turned to me, he grinned, causing more blood to pour from his face, and said, "Told you I'd take a bullet for you one day." Now, thankfully, Sid didn't need any convincing. He just obviously pressed charges against Rhea, who quite clearly either had some kind of mental illness or severe anger management issues. And even though I don't quite agree, the courts ruled that she was perfectly sane to stand trial, and she spent 6 months in prison, 2 years on probation, and some fairly lengthy stint of anger management therapy when she came out. Naturally, Cedar and I also took a restraining order out against her, which was granted. No, I have no idea what's become of Rhea now, and I'm not sure I want to know. I'm a woman in my 20s, and I've been a long-time listener. I never had the guts to write this out before because I can't write to save my life, but I'll give it a go anyway. And you know what they say, you miss every shot you don't take. Now, I'm generally quite a mousy, quiet woman who keeps to herself. I work in a bookstore, and I like to listen to true crime podcasts, just like yours, and I watch Netflix. I'm really boring, and I'm not ashamed of that fact. I learned early on that excitement isn't always positive and isn't always what it's cracked up to be, and you can thank dear old mom and dad for that and the absolute pig-poo effort that they made in raising me. Thankfully, my older sister was there to make sure that I was always fed, cleaned, and that my clothes smelled at least relatively fresh. I love you, Audrey. I wouldn't have made it this far in life without you. Now, thankfully, this creepy story doesn't involve something terrible happening to my older sister, but it does once again show her looking out for her little brat kid sis. And when I was in middle school, I was the most awkward, gangly preteen you could possibly imagine. Actually a pretty short queen, but as I was growing up, my body felt like it was all arms and legs and elbows and knees. And my hair was a constant curly mess that I regularly burned with straighteners until Odd showed me how to actually use them. And oh yeah, I had braces and a retainer, and in high school, guess what? Acne. And it might seem like I'm being harsh on myself, but I was the ugly duckling. I'm actually pretty happy with how I look now, so I guess the years of suffering were worth it. There's a reason for this rambling, though. I'm sorry. During our first semester of our last year at middle school, one of the coolest boys in my year asked me out. Now, looking back, he was a complete try-hard emo, but he smoked behind the gym, and he wore a black trench coat, and he said the F word in front of the teachers. He was a rebel, and he told me that he wanted to be my boyfriend. At first, I said no because I thought that it had to be a prank. And it soon became clear that it wasn't, though, and for 6 months, I dated the guy who I thought was the most badass guy in our year. And I'm pretty sure people laughed at him behind his back and to his face, but he always hid that from me, and I never stopped thinking that he was the coolest guy since the Fonz himself. Anyway, my cool emo boyfriend was named, or at least nicknamed, Cheese, and he never would tell me why, but he seemed to like the nickname and was cool with me calling him Cheese, and so I did. And then one day, without any warning, he told me that he was leaving school after the weekend and moving to a different state because his father had been reassigned to the New York office. I think he was a lawyer or a hedge manager or something like that. I thought Cheese was joking. He had a habit of teasing me with things like we are breaking up or so-and-so is dead, and he'd just seen the principal and our teacher doing it in the closet, and a baby popped out and looked at him, and that was a Simpsons joke, so I always remember that one. Turns out he wasn't kidding, and he simply never showed up to school on Monday. Didn't leave me some forwarding address, didn't call me, just completely ghosted me. Maybe that was the prank. Maybe he'd always known that he'd be leaving then. Jump forward 13 years. I'm sitting in my local coffee shop making use of their Wi-Fi when I get a Facebook friend request. Now it's from someone called Nathan Lester, and his profile picture is just some anime ninja. Now anyway, I didn't deny the friend request. I never got friend requests really, but I didn't accept it either. And when I clicked on his profile, I saw that we had 3 mutual friends, all from middle school. And a message request pinged, so I accepted it. Hi, it's Cheese from middle school. And that's when I realized Nathan Lester, Red Lester, is a kind of cheese especially popular over in the UK. That's probably how he got that nickname. We chatted on Facebook for a few days, and he was kind of very talky, reminiscing on old times that I'd barely even thought about or even remembered. And it worried me a little, but maybe he was just excited to reconnect with an old friend. Now, he had moved around the country due to his father's job after all, and I accepted his friend request and saw that he was a self-employed freelancer who'd graduated college. And despite feeling like a stalker, I went through all of his photos, which I couldn't find a single one of him. They were all animated characters, mostly anime, and a bunch of pictures of cats, which was adorable. And eventually he asked me if I wanted to meet him in a public place to catch up. And the fact that he specified a public place really put me, I guess, at ease. Some guys will wait for girls to suggest that just in case they can get us back to their apartments for a one-night stand. I suggested my local coffee shop, and to my surprise, he said that he was a regular too. I'd never seen him there, but I visited in the mornings. Maybe he was an afternoon guy. And when I showed up, I was the only customer in the cafe. I said hi to the employees, who I was vaguely friends with, and sat down. Now, I'm really going to try and be mean in the next part, but facts are facts. As I was drinking my coffee and reading my book, a short, portly man in cargo shorts and a t-shirt with holes in it sat down opposite me. I told him, as politely as I could, that I was waiting for someone, and he said something like, "Wait no more. Cheese is here." Well, darn. This was him. And when I spoke, I could see that most of his teeth looked disgusting. His skin was terribly unwashed and greasy, and he was balding in the way that had given himself a comb-over in this sort of monk's hairstyle. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being bald. Most women actually find it pretty attractive, so if you do start losing your hair early, my advice is to not make yourself look like a serial killer. Now, we hadn't even begun talking when Cheese told me that he needed a huge favor, and could I loan him $500 to pay off a credit card. He said that he'd be able to get me the money back in 6 months to a year. I told him I didn't remotely have the kind of money to lend him. Now, this wasn't entirely true, but profusely apologized, and deep down, I was pretty furious though. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he started talking about our times in middle school like they were the best years of his life. And then it kind of made me sad when I realized that this might actually be true. Unfortunately, he ruined that when he kept referring to our meetup as a date, and then he told me that he'd never met another girl like me, and in fact, he'd never dated anyone since our little tryst in middle school. And believe it or not, we didn't even kiss, because I was the one for him, and we were destined to be together. Now, trying to be as pleasant as I could, I told him that I'd been under the impression that this was just a friendly catch-up. And then he asked if I'd dated anyone since him, which obviously yes, I had. And next came the, "Are you a virgin?" question. Oh my god, come on dude, I'm 25 and I just told you I had previous adult relationships. Do you really need to know if we did the deed? And here I lied and told him that I actually had a boyfriend now and that I didn't think that he'd be very happy with the way this meeting was going, so maybe I should just leave. He yelled something like, "Not if I leave first," and stormed out, leaving me with some bill for the various coffees and 3 expensive cakes that he'd ordered. As I was driving home, I called Audrey, or Officer Audrey as I teasingly called her, because, yeah, my older, protective sister had gone on to be a cop. And when I returned to my apartment, the ancient receptionist told me that a delivery man had taken a package up for me and then left. Now, this wasn't alarming by itself. I ordered from Amazon pretty often, and when I reached my hallway, I couldn't see any package on the ground, though. But what I did see was a replica ninja throwing star there and a dent in the door where someone had clearly tried and failed to stab it into the door as some type of threat. Instead, stuck next to the groove with a little sticky tack was a note that read, "I'll see you again." Of course, Officer Audrey absolutely refused to let me stay alone. She was currently living with her boyfriend, who I was pretty friendly with, so I assumed that I'd just sleep on the couch over there for a while. Audrey surprised me, though, by saying that she was coming to stay at my apartment. That way, if Cheese did try anything, then Big Sister Cop would be waiting for him. Now, after a few nights of Audrey sleeping at my place, we heard a banging on the door. It wasn't like a knocking, but a sound as if someone was trying to kick the door open. The door barely even shuddered, so the intruder wasn't exactly the most competent. Audrey called some of her on-duty buddies while I tried to listen through the door. Unfortunately, my apartment had been bust into during a SWAT raid before I moved in, and the door that they'd installed as a replacement didn't have a peephole. And sadly, I wasn't able to see whether this assailant was Cheese or if this was just some insane coincidence. Now, before I could really act, Audrey decided that she was bored of waiting for her backup and threw the door open inwards. Now, even though she shouldn't have because she was off duty, Audrey held up her gun. She didn't point it at the door kicker, she just held it up in that position that cops do. And it was Cheese at the door. All 300 sweaty, heavy-breathing pounds of him. And this wasn't my point of concern, though. My biggest concern was the large, thin sword that Cheese was holding over his shoulder like some kind of martial arts movie protagonist. Audrey shoved me out of the way, and Cheese brought that sword down hard on her shoulder. It cut into her flesh, but just the flesh, as this sword was clearly just some replica that Cheese had sharpened, and it wasn't a good replica either because it shattered into pieces as it caused the flesh wound on Aubrey's left shoulder. But, oh hell, you don't attack a cop with a sword, especially when 3 of her unit buddies burst into the hallway and tased the absolute crap out of Cheese. But not to be crude, but I mean that literally, he did in fact defecate himself during the tasing. And later, Audrey told me that that's not really something that happens from being tased, so he must have just soiled himself in fear from being charged by multiple cops and the realization that he just shattered his probably most expensive replica sword against a 4th cop's shoulder. The cops took Cheese in, and while Audrey tried to tell me about the night he spent in the cell, I didn't really want to hear it. I kind of felt bad for the guy because there was something clearly wrong with his head. And the way me and Odd had grown up, our horrible trailer park mother and her string of drug dealer boyfriends, I know that sometimes while you can come out the other side a better person, there are other times where you end up broken. And that's exactly what Cheese's lawyers managed to argue. He wasn't of sound mind and he wasn't fit to stand trial. His living conditions were almost untenable and he was deemed a vulnerable individual. And as such, it was ruled that he wasn't fit to stand trial and instead spent an unknown amount of time in some mental health facility. Now, this wasn't years ago, so for all I know, he's still there. It was sad that he suffered, but I'm still a tiny bit skeptical that he had zero responsibility for his actions. Up until our very last encounter, he seemed to know what he was doing and what his plans were. And the only plus side to the whole thing was that Audrey gets to tell people that she was sliced by a samurai sword. And if people ask me to share a fun fact about myself, I tell them that I once dated an evil ninja. I'm 44 now, and this all went down exactly 10 years ago. And as much as I adore my son, I did think that I was kind of resigned to a life as a single father. Now listeners, please don't crucify me, but in my experience, it's very hard for a single dad with a young male child to find a long-term partner. Maybe there's some scientific reason for this, or maybe I just get really unlucky. And I had it clear and visible on my profile that I had a wonderful 5-year-old son, and whenever I'd swipe right, they'd never swipe right back. Just for those worrying, he 100% knows that I don't blame him for this and never did. We've always been best friends, and he's an extremely smart kid. And on the rare occasions I did get a date, she almost always claimed that she didn't notice the sections where I had a son. Other times you could tell that she was gauging whether I'm hot enough to warrant raising somebody else's kid. No, was the answer apparently. Eventually, I gave up on dating apps and stopped bothering to look for a date at all. As it turns out, my son was staying with his grandparents one weekend, so me and my buddy Jesse decided to go bar hopping on a Friday night. Nothing crazy. We were 30-something-year-old men after all, and we certainly weren't going to hang out in clubs where the next oldest person was 22. But there's a surprisingly large amount of nightlife for the 30 to 40-year-olds in Chicago, and we found ourselves having a lot of fun, more than we'd expected. Now, eventually I met a woman who said that she was 28 and looked it too, and actually was. Sometimes people lie about their ages in places like this, but why bother? We all look and act our age, even if some age differently than others. Now, we ended up getting a little bit drunk and taking a taxi home. I was a gentleman and offered her my bed while I slept on the couch. Main rule, no drunken sex with someone I'm not married to. And the next day, we both woke up with hangovers and spent the whole day together. And I won't bore you with the details of our courtship, let's just jump to the important stuff. And the woman's name was Sheila. She'd moved in and served as the sort of surrogate mother to my son. And at first, everything was fine. She'd watch him sometimes help with his homework, do a small share of chores that I used to do as a single dad. And eventually, though, she stopped doing really any of that. She wasn't looking for a job, and I was pretty much paying for everything. And she persuaded me to take a credit card out for us, which, against my better judgment, I did, not even questioning why she wasn't eligible herself. And I guess I was just, I don't know. She was in her 20s, attractive, I was in my 30s. She had a good relationship with my boy, and our intimate life was incredible. Who cared if she left a dish or plate or two lying around the house? It did start to grind me down, though, and when Christmas came, I realized that I'd have to borrow some money from my parents in order to be able to fully afford the item that my son wanted. I forgot what it was now, but we'll just pretend it's something really cool. It was mid-November when she broke the final straw. I came home to hear her yelling at my son that he was lazy and stupid for getting a B in English. I discussed with her multiple times that I had issues with his English teacher and her teaching methods, and that my son wasn't to be punished for a less than perfect grade in a subject. And yet here she was, yelling at him, telling him that Santa would be spending his money on Christmas presents for her instead. And then she threatened to smack his butt when he responded with, "You're not my mom." Now, if there's one thing I don't stand for is corporal punishment and threats of violence against my kid. And I stormed in and told Sheila to just leave. Now, she looked at me like she'd just come out of a trance, and then, to much to my surprise, she agreed. She said it was for the best. She just asked if she could have until the weekend to pack all of her stuff together, which seemed reasonable. She'd fully moved in, so she had to fully move out as well. And that afternoon I was working in my office, and I've been able to do more remote work since Sheila, but I typically work from home so I could parent the boy. And I heard the front door opening, some muffled voices and shuffling, and then the door slamming shut. Eventually, I ended the call I was on and made it out into the apartment and saw it was empty and ran into the parking lot. I could see Sheila speeding up in her beat-up junker, and I could see my kid looking through the back window, tears streaming down his face. Immediately, I had to develop a plan. I'd get into my own car, chase Sheila, and drive erratically so the cops pulled me over and I could quickly tell them the situation. I knew I'd have to be careful because this wasn't exactly the quiet part of inner Chicago, and I didn't want to save my son but send some poor baby in a stroller to fly across the street in a deadly impact. And so I think my erratic driving, especially given my profession, more on that later, was more like slight misdemeanors than anything else. I followed Sheila around various corners, swerving around parked cars, speeding, trying to be as safe as possible. And the frustrating thing is, I caught sight of some cop cars a block over, but they didn't seem interested in me. I drove up, following Sheila, and saw the two cop cars and a van had her trapped in a street with another cop car blocking her from reversing. When I saw a female cop hugging my son, I dived out of the car and ran to him. He yelled "Daddy" in these excited tears, so the cops immediately knew to let me through. It turns out that two Chicago PD officers had both clocked me driving erratically and actually knew me. Now, I'm a stay-at-home prosecutor, so I'm not some stranger to a handful of cops. This pair knew that something had to be wrong, so they put a call out for any vehicle that a car with my registration might be pursuing, explaining that I was a junior prosecutor. A helicopter patrol easily identified Sheila's car as being the one that I was following, and they also ran a check and saw that she had multiple outstanding parking tickets in Chicago and a warrant in Iowa that they weren't willing to disclose. Later, I tried accessing her fine, but they'd restricted my access, but fair enough. Now, reunited with my son, I'd never been more happy or more scared. I realized then that losing him would be the most upsetting, devastating thing in my life. He just yelled, "Don't be lame, Dad," from the other side of the room, so I know I'm parenting right. And Sheila was charged with child endangerment and a series of other minor misdemeanors. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to serve as a prosecutor on the case for obvious reasons, but I wish I had. Her lawyers had managed to argue Sheila's way out of a kidnapping charge, and I'm still not happy about that. When she's released, though, she's being sent to Iowa to face whatever mysterious warrant she has waiting for her there. Like I said, I'm 44 now, and I haven't dated since Sheila, and frankly, I don't want to. I have family and friends, and nobody could replace my boy's mom anyway, even though he sadly never got to know her as she passed during childbirth. Angela, I love you, and I'm certain that you're up in heaven and you helped keep our son safe that day. I know you'd want me to be happy too, whether that meant I dated again or not, but right now, I have everything in the world I could ask for. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul, and all links are in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, back to the lobby with you.